The galaxy was old. It had been ruled by the same empires for over 200,000 years. The Galactic Concord, an alliance of more than 4,000 alien species, kept order across the stars. They had laws, they had fleets, and they had a simple belief that had never been challenged. Young species were weak, and the strong did as they pleased. Humanity was young. They had only discovered faster-than-light travel 60 years ago. Their ships were small. Their colonies were few. They had built one true settlement beyond Earth, a world called Proxima Haven, orbiting the nearest star to their sun. It was a beautiful place. Green hills, clean rivers, cities built with glass and white stone. Over 3 million people lived there, and they called it home. The Galactic Concord looked at humanity and saw nothing special. They classified Earth as a Class II infant civilization, which was a polite way of saying they did not matter. Humans were too new, too small, and too far behind to be taken seriously. Most species in the Concord had never even heard of them. But the Dralith hegemony had. The Dralith were reptilian creatures, tall and scaled, with cold eyes and colder hearts. Their empire had conquered dozens of younger species over the centuries. They took worlds, stripped them of resources, and enslaved the populations. The Concord knew this and did nothing, because the Dralith were powerful and useful, and the victims were always small and unimportant. When Dralith scouts discovered Proxima Haven, they saw an easy target. A young species with no real military. A rich world with good soil and clean water. A population that could be put to work. Warlord Sethkon, one of the Dralith's most decorated commanders, was given a fleet of 200 warships and a simple order: take the human colony. He did not bother to send the warning. The attack came on a Tuesday morning, local time. The people of Proxima Haven were going to work, taking their children to school, drinking coffee in small cafes by the river. Then the sky turned red. Dralith warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel directly above the planet. They opened fire on the orbital stations first. The 3 small defense platforms that Earth had built around the colony were destroyed in less than 4 minutes. They had never been designed to fight a real fleet. They were there to stop pirates and asteroids, not an empire. Then the bombardment began. Plasma fire rained down on the cities. Buildings that had taken years to construct were turned to ash in seconds. Families running through the streets were caught in explosions that left nothing behind. The screaming lasted for hours, broadcast on every open channel as the colony's communication systems overloaded with distress calls. When it was over, 1.2 million people were dead. The cities were burning. The rivers were choked with dust and debris. Dralith ground forces landed in massive transport ships and began rounding up survivors. They put them in chains. They separated children from parents. They set up work camps in the ruins of what had been parks and playgrounds. Warlord Sethkon watched from his flagship and felt nothing but satisfaction. This was how the galaxy worked. The strong took, and the weak suffered. The distress signal reached Earth 7 hours later. The reaction was unlike anything that had ever happened in human history. For centuries, humanity had been divided. Nations argued. Factions fought. Governments disagreed on everything from taxes to territory. But when the people of Earth saw the footage from Proxima Haven, the burning cities, the dead children, the survivors in chains, something changed. It did not change slowly. It changed in a single day. Every government on Earth held emergency sessions. Within 48 hours, they had done what centuries of diplomacy had failed to do. They united. The United Terran Authority was given full wartime powers. Every military force on the planet was merged into one. Every shipyard was activated. Every resource was redirected. There was no panic. There was no confusion. There was only a cold, quiet fury that settled over the entire species like frost. The Galactic Concorde sent a message to Earth expressing what they called deep regret over the attack. They said they would not intervene because the situation was classified as a regional dispute involving a pre-ascension species. In simpler words, humanity was too small to matter, and the Dralith were too important to offend. Earth's temporary ambassador read the message in front of the newly formed Terran Parliament. The room was silent for a long time. Then the ambassador folded the message, set it down, and said, "We will remember this." They would. Admiral Kira Vasquez was 43 years old. She had served in Earth's Navy for 20 years, rising through the ranks not because of politics or connections, but because she was brilliant and she was relentless. She had dark eyes that could be warm when she laughed with her crew and absolutely terrifying when she was angry. She was very angry now. The Terran Authority placed her in command of the first expeditionary fleet, every combat-capable ship humanity had. It was not a large fleet. 67 ships, most of them frigates and destroyers. A handful of cruisers. No battleships, because humanity had never needed them before. Against the 200 Dralith warships still in orbit around Proxima Haven, it was a suicide mission by any galactic standard. Vasquez did not care about galactic standards. Before the fleet departed from Earth's orbit, she opened a channel to Proxima Haven. The signal was weak and full of static, but it reached the underground shelters where survivors were hiding. Thousands of people huddled in darkness heard her voice come through their emergency radios. "This is Admiral Vasquez of the United Terran Authority. I know you are afraid. I know you are suffering. I need you to hold on a little longer. We are coming for you. Every single one of you. That is not a hope. That is a fact." The fleet jumped to faster-than-light speed and vanished into the stars. On Proxima Haven, Warlord Sethcon received a report that a small human fleet was heading his way. He was eating his evening meal at the time, sitting in a chair that had been taken from the colony's governor's office. He read the report, noted the size of the human fleet, and laughed. 67 ships, he said to his officers. Against 200. These creatures are as stupid as they are weak. Let them come. It will save us the trip to their homeworld. His officers laughed with him. None of them were laughing 2 days later. The Dralith fleet hung in orbit above Proxima Haven like a wall of iron and fire. 200 warships arranged in the standard galactic battle formation that had been used for thousands of years. It was a proven design. Every ship knew its place. Every weapon was aimed outward. In 10,000 engagements across galactic history, this formation had never been broken by an inferior force. Admiral Kira Vasquez studied the formation on her display screen and smiled. It was not a happy smile. "They are using the textbook," she said to her bridge crew. "Good. That means they will do exactly what we expect." The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Proxima system. 67 ships against 200. By every calculation the galaxy used, this battle was already decided. The Dralith had more ships, bigger guns, thicker armor, and centuries of combat experience. But humanity had something the Dralith did not understand, because no species in the galaxy had ever fought the way humans fought. Vasquez gave her first order. Launch the Screamers. From every human ship, small pods were fired into space. Hundreds of them, each one no bigger than a person. They were ECM pods, electronic countermeasure devices, and they began broadcasting false signals in every direction. To the Dralith sensors, the 67 human ships suddenly looked like 600. Ghost signals appeared everywhere. False engine signatures. Fake weapon charges. The Dralith targeting systems went mad, trying to lock onto ships that did not exist. Warlord Seth Khan stared at his sensor display with wide eyes. Where did they get reinforcements? He demanded. We are not sure they did, Warlord, his sensor officer replied nervously. The readings are confused. We cannot tell which contacts are real. Then fire at all of them, Seth Khan roared. The Dralith fleet opened fire in every direction. Plasma bolts and kinetic rounds tore through empty space, hitting nothing. They were shooting at ghosts, while the real human fleet slipped through the gaps in their formation like wolves through a fence. Vasquez had studied every battle the Dralith had ever fought. She knew their tactics, their response times, and their weaknesses. The Dralith were strong in a straight fight, ship against ship, gun against gun. So she refused to give them a straight fight. Human ships moved in small groups of 3 and 4, darting between the larger Dralith vessels, firing at engines and sensor arrays instead of armor plating. They were faster and more agile, built for speed rather than brute force. While the Dralith tried to turn their massive warships to face targets that kept moving, human frigates raked their flanks with precise targeted strikes. But the real shock came when Vasquez gave her second order. Launch the boarding teams. Across the galaxy, species fought with weapons fired across the void. Ship-to-ship boarding had not been used in serious warfare for over 5,000 years. It was considered primitive, insane, and suicidal. No modern species would strap soldiers into armored pods and fire them at enemy warships to cut through the hull and fight hand-to-hand in the corridors. No modern species was human. The boarding pods launched small, fast, heavily armored capsules carrying squads of Terran Marines in powered combat suits. They crossed the gap between ships in seconds, slamming into the hulls of Dralith warships with magnetic clamps that bit into metal like teeth. Cutting torches flared to life, and within minutes, the Marines were inside. The Dralith had never faced anything like this. Their warships were designed to fight other warships, not infantry inside their own corridors. The Marines moved through the ships with terrifying speed, clearing rooms and taking control of critical systems. The Dralith soldiers they encountered were bigger, stronger, and had scales that could stop a knife. It did not help them. Humans had spent their entire evolutionary history fighting things that were bigger and stronger. They had hunted animals with nothing but sharpened sticks. They had survived ice ages, plagues, and each other. The Dralith were predators, but humans were something worse. They were predators who had learned to think, to plan, and to never, ever stop. In the corridors of the Dralith warships, the fighting was brutal and short. Marines in powered armor moved with a coordination that the Dralith could not match. They covered each other, communicated constantly, and pressed forward without hesitation. When a Marine fell, the others stepped over the body and kept fighting. The Dralith, used to enemies who broke and ran, did not know how to handle an enemy that simply refused to stop. Within 6 hours, the battle had turned. 12 Dralith warships had been boarded and captured. 37 more had been disabled by the hit-and-run attacks. The rest were in disarray, their formation shattered, their communications jammed by human electronic warfare. Warlord Seth Khan's flagship, the pride of the hegemony, was surrounded. Vasquez sent him a message. Surrender your fleet. Release the prisoners on the surface. You have 10 minutes. Seth Khan did not respond for 8 of those minutes. Then a squad of Terran Marines cut through the bridge doors of his flagship and found him hiding behind his command chair, his scales pale with fear. The warlord who had laughed at the idea of a human fleet was now trembling at the sight of human soldiers standing in his own bridge. He surrendered. Vasquez did not execute him, though many of her crew wanted her to. She had a different plan. She forced Seth Khan to stand in front of a camera and broadcast a message to the entire Dralith hegemony. His voice shook as he spoke the words she had written for him. My fleet is destroyed. My soldiers are prisoners. The humans have defeated us. Leave their space and never return. The broadcast was picked up by every species in the sector. Then it spread further. Within days, the footage of the Battle of Proxima Haven was being watched. On worlds thousands of light years from Earth, aliens who had never heard of humanity watched in disbelief as small human ships tore apart a Dralith formation. They watched Marines in powered armor cutting through warship hulls and fighting in zero gravity. They watched a species that had been in space for only 60 years humiliate one of the galaxy's oldest military powers. A word began to spread, whispered in fear and fascination across 1,000 worlds. Deathworlders. It was a term used for species that evolved on planets so harsh, so violent, so full of predators and disasters, that simply surviving was an achievement. Earth, they realized, was one of those worlds. Extreme gravity, constant weather, predators everywhere. And the creatures who had clawed their way to the top of that world's food chain were now in space. Proxima Haven was liberated. The chains were removed. The survivors wept as they saw human soldiers walking through the ruins. Medical teams arrived. Food and supplies were distributed. Children who had been separated from their parents were reunited. But there was no celebration. The cost had been too high. 17 human ships had been lost. Over 4,000 soldiers and crew were dead. And on the surface below, the scars of the bombardment were everywhere. Empty places where buildings and people had been. Admiral Vasquez stood on the bridge of her ship and looked down at the wounded colony. She had won, but she was not foolish enough to think this was over. She was right. Far away, in the dark halls of the Dralith High Council, the ruling lords were meeting in secret. The humiliation was unbearable. A young primitive species had defeated them, and the whole galaxy had watched. This could not stand. They sent messengers to 2 other empires, the Vorthon Collective, cold and calculating conquerors of machines, and the Maw of Silence, a terrifying species that used psychic weapons to break the minds of their enemies. Together, these 3 powers formed the Tripartite Pact in absolute secrecy. Their goal was simple and total. They would assemble an armada so large that no amount of human cleverness could survive it. And then they would erase humanity from the galaxy as if they had never existed. The galaxy's greatest mistake was about to become its greatest lesson. The galaxy thought the story of humanity was over. A lucky victory, they said. A small species that had punched above its weight and would now quietly take its place at the bottom of the galactic order. The Concord sent a polite message congratulating Earth on its successful defense and suggested that humanity focus on rebuilding rather than provoking further conflict. Earth ignored them. Earth was busy. 6 months after the Battle of Proxima Haven, a Terran intelligence officer named Major Chun Wei sat in a dark room beneath the mountains of Switzerland and read a decoded transmission that made his blood run cold. Human hackers, the best in a species that had invented the concept of digital warfare, had broken into the Dralith military communication network. What they found was not just a plan for revenge. It was a plan for extinction. 3 empires. The Dralith hegemony, hungry for revenge. The Vorthon Collective, a machine-augmented species that conquered through cold efficiency. And the Maw of Silence, whose psychic weapons could shatter the minds of entire armies. Together, they were assembling an armada of 12,000 warships. Their target was Earth. Their goal was the complete destruction of the human species. Major Chun delivered the report to Admiral Vasquez and the Terran Parliament. The room was silent for a very long time after he finished speaking. "How long do we have?" Vasquez asked. "Approximately 2 years before they can assemble and coordinate the full armada," Chun replied. 2 years. against three empires that had been fighting wars for thousands of years, against a fleet that outnumbered humanity 50-1. Any rational species would have surrendered. Any rational species would have begged the Concorde for mercy, or packed their bags and fled to the farthest corner of the galaxy. Humanity did none of these things. The Terran Authority launched Project Prometheus, the most ambitious military mobilization in human history. Every resource, every mind, every pair of hands was put to work. Shipyards that had been building 3 vessels a month were expanded and redesigned to build 30. Universities shut down their normal programs and became weapons laboratories. Factories that had been making consumer goods retooled overnight to produce armor plating, missile components, and reactor cores. The entire species went to war, not with anger, but with a kind of focused determination that frightened even their own psychologists. Sociologists later called it the quiet fire, a state of collective purpose so intense that it erased every other concern. There were no protests, no political debates, no disagreements about funding. Everyone understood. If they did not prepare, they would die. All of them. Every man, woman, and child on Earth and in every colony. And so they worked. They worked in shifts around the clock. Engineers slept in their offices. Scientists ate meals at their lab benches. Pilots trained until they passed out from exhaustion, and then they got up and trained again. But building more ships would not be enough. Humanity was still too small, too new, and too outnumbered to win a straight fight against 12,000 warships. They needed weapons that would change the rules of the war. The first was the Novolance, a weapon that could channel the energy of a star through a quantum tunnel and deliver it as a concentrated beam. On paper, it should not have worked. The physics was considered theoretical by galactic standards. Human physicists made it work in 11 months. The second was the Spectre field, a stealth technology so advanced that it could hide entire fleets from every known type of sensor. The Vorthon Collective, famous for their sensor technology, would not be able to see a human ship until it was already firing. The third was the most dangerous. It was called the Rift Compressor, and its story began with a stranger who arrived on Earth asking for help. His name was Thalvran, and he was a Quillari, one of the oldest and most respected species in the galaxy. But Thalvran was not respected. He was disgraced. He had been a senior scientist in the Quillari Research Institute, and he had discovered something that his government wanted to stay buried. 100,000 years ago, a species called the Valori had developed a technology that could fold space itself, compress it, twist it, and use it as a weapon. The technology worked, but in their final test, the Valori accidentally crushed an entire star system into a point of light no bigger than a grain of sand. 3 billion lives, gone in an instant. The Galactic Concorde banned the technology and destroyed every record of it. Or so they thought. Thalvran had found the records. And when the Quillari government told him to destroy them and forget what he had learned, he refused. He believed that knowledge should never be buried, no matter how dangerous. They stripped him of his position, his reputation, and his home. He fled across the galaxy and eventually found his way to Earth. He offered humanity the plans for the Rift Compressor. He also offered a warning. This technology destroyed the species that created it, he told the Terran Science Council. It is the most dangerous weapon ever conceived. If you use it incorrectly, you will not just destroy your enemy. You will destroy yourselves. The council thanked him for the warning. Then they took the plans and began building it anyway. Thalvran watched them work and felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Hope mixed with terror. While Earth prepared for war, Ambassador Adara Usse was sent to the Galactic Concorde to make one final attempt at diplomacy. She was a tall woman with a calm voice and eyes that missed nothing. She stood before the Concorde assembly, thousands of alien delegates from across the galaxy and presented the evidence of the tripartite pact. 3 empires are assembling an armada to destroy a member species of this galaxy, she said. We are asking the Concord to enforce its own laws. Intervene. Stop this before billions die. The chamber was quiet. Then the delegate from the Quillari, an ancient creature draped in ceremonial robes, spoke from his elevated platform. Your species is an infant, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. You won a single battle against a careless enemy, and now you believe you are important. The natural order of this galaxy is older than your entire civilization. Accept subjugation. Accept your place, or face the consequences. That is how things work. Osei stared at him for a long moment. The entire chamber watched. Then she spoke, and her voice carried to every corner of the vast room. We are not infants, she said. We are the children you forgot to fear. And if the natural order of this galaxy means the extinction of the innocent, then we will break the natural order. We will shatter it so completely that no species will ever again be told to accept its own destruction. She turned and walked out of the chamber without looking back. Her speech was recorded. It was leaked to the galactic press within hours. Across the galaxy, billions of aliens watched this human woman stand before the most powerful assembly in existence and tell them they were wrong. On dozens of oppressed worlds, species that had been conquered, exploited, and forgotten by the Concord's indifference, her words were played again and again. And quietly, secretly, help began to arrive. Small ships carrying intelligence reports, anonymous data transfers containing Dralith fleet movements, supply crates with no return address, filled with rare materials Earth desperately needed. The galaxy's forgotten species could not fight alongside humanity openly, but they could help in the shadows. Earth was not alone anymore, but the numbers were still overwhelming. 2 years passed. Earth built its fleet, 2,400 warships, the largest military force humanity had ever assembled. The Nova Lances were installed. The Spectre fields were tested. The Rift compressor, massive and terrifying, was hidden in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. And then the day came. Deep space sensors detected the tripartite armada entering the outer reaches of explored space, heading directly for the Sol system. 12,000 warships from 3 empires, stretching across the void in a formation so large it could be detected from light years away. Across the galaxy, species turned their sensors toward Sol and held their breath. News channels on 10,000 worlds broadcast the same message. The humans were about to face the largest invasion fleet in recorded history. Most believed they were about to watch humanity die. Admiral Vasquez stood on the bridge of her flagship, the UTS Iron Will, and looked at the incoming armada on her display. 12,000 points of light, each one an enemy warship coming to kill everyone she had ever known. She pressed the fleet-wide communication button. All ships, she said calmly, activate Spectre fields. Go dark. And wait for my signal. 2,400 human warships vanished from every sensor in the galaxy. The trap was set. The tripartite armada dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system, and 12,000 warships filled the darkness of space like a steel ocean. Dralith dreadnoughts the size of mountains. Borthon battle platforms covered in sensor arrays and automated weapons. The black, organic-looking vessels of the Maw of Silence, whose hulls seemed to breathe. At the center of the formation, Warlord Seth Khan sat in the command chair of his new flagship, the Vengeance of Scale. He had been given one final chance by the Dralith High Council. Victory or death. Those were his only options. He had chosen victory, and he had the largest fleet ever assembled to ensure it. His sensors swept the Sol system. They found nothing. Where are they? he demanded. His officers checked and rechecked. There were no human ships, no defense platforms, no orbital stations armed for battle. The system appeared empty, as if humanity had simply abandoned it and fled. "They have run," said the Vorthan fleet commander, a cold and mechanical voice transmitted from a ship bristling with weapons. "Their courage at Proxima was an illusion. They know they cannot face us." The Maw of Silence said nothing. They never said much. Their representative, a creature called the Voice, communicated through a low psychic hum that translated into words. "Something is wrong," the Voice whispered. "I sense minds, many minds, but I cannot find them." Sefkan ignored the warning. He had 12,000 ships and the backing of 3 empires. Whatever tricks the humans had, they would not be enough. He ordered the Armada forward toward Earth. The fleet moved inward, past the frozen rocks at the edge of the system, past the gas giants, past the asteroid belt. Every sensor was active. Every weapon was ready. The Armada was tense but confident. They crossed the orbit of Neptune. Nothing happened. They crossed the orbit of Saturn. Nothing happened. They reached the orbit of Jupiter, and Warlord Sefkan began to relax. Perhaps the humans really had fled. Perhaps this would be easier than every alarm on every ship in the Armada screamed at the same time. Space itself seemed to tear open as 2,400 human warships materialized around the tripartite fleet in a perfect, 3-dimensional sphere. They appeared from nowhere, above, below, on every side, their specter fields dropping simultaneously to reveal the full force of humanity's 2-year preparation. And they were not alone. Across the asteroid belt, on the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, hidden among the rocks and ice of the outer system, thousands of weapons platforms activated. Missile batteries, railguns, energy projectors. The entire Sol system had been turned into a fortress, and the Armada was now deep inside it. Admiral Vasquez's voice cut through every communication channel. "All ships fire." The Battle of Sol began. 2,400 human ships opened fire at once. Nova lances, those impossible weapons that channeled the energy of stars, burned through the darkness in beams of blinding white light. The first volley struck the outer ring of the Dralith formation, and warships that had survived centuries of battle were cut in half like paper. Explosions bloomed in the void, silent and terrible, as reactor cores detonated and debris scattered in every direction. The Armada reeled, but it did not break. 12,000 ships was an enormous force, and even with the element of surprise, humanity was still outnumbered 5-1. The tripartite commanders recovered quickly and began returning fire with everything they had. The battle became a storm. Dralith plasma cannons pounded human cruisers, shattering shields and tearing through hulls. Vorthon automated weapon systems, controlled by artificial intelligence, tracked and fired at human ships with mechanical precision. The first human vessels began to die, frigates caught in crossfire, destroyers overwhelmed by concentrated salvos. And then the Maw of Silence deployed their most feared weapon. Every species in the galaxy knew about the psychic scream. It was a wave of pure mental anguish, broadcast from the organic ships of the Maw, designed to overwhelm the minds of enemy crews. It caused terror, despair, and complete psychological collapse. Entire fleets had surrendered after a single exposure. Some species had been reduced to weeping, shaking wrecks on their own bridge floors. The scream hit the human fleet like a wall. On the bridge of the Ein Will, Admiral Vasquez gripped her armrests as a wave of nausea and pain swept through her. Her vision blurred. Her nose began to bleed. Around her, crew members groaned and grabbed their heads. Then it passed. Vasquez wiped the blood from her upper lip, blinked hard, and looked at her displays. Every ship in the human fleet was still fighting. The scream had given them headaches. Some had nosebleeds. A few had vomited. But not a single human ship had stopped firing. On the bridge of the Maw flagship, the voice stood frozen. "They are still fighting," it said. And for the first time in the recorded history of the Maw of Silence, there was fear in its voice. The scream did not break them. They felt it, and they did not break. Humanity had spent its entire history dealing with fear. They had evolved on a world where fear was a daily companion. Fear of predators, fear of starvation, fear of each other. They had not conquered fear. They had learned to function inside of it, to think clearly while terrified, to keep moving while every instinct screamed at them to stop. The Maw had never encountered a species like this. Their greatest weapon was useless. The battle raged for 3 days. Human swarm drones, millions of tiny unmanned craft, poured into the Vorthon formations and overwhelmed their point defense systems through sheer numbers. For every drone destroyed, 10 more took its place. The Vorthon, who prided themselves on efficiency and precision, were being drowned in chaos. Once again, Terran Marines boarded enemy ships. This time, they wore the new Fenrir-class power armor, heavier, faster, and equipped with weapons that could cut through Dralith scales and Vorthon alloys alike. The boarding actions were savage and efficient. Human soldiers fought through corridors in zero gravity, room by room, deck by deck, with a relentlessness that shattered the morale of every species they faced. But humanity was paying a terrible price. Ships were being lost. Thousands of crew members were dying. Earth's orbital ring, the great structure that circled the planet, was hit by long-range strikes and broke apart in several places. Debris rained down on the planet below. Cities that had never known war felt explosions shake the ground. The death toll climbed into the millions. By the third day, the Armada had been reduced from 12,000 ships to just under 4,000. But humanity's fleet had been cut nearly in half as well. The battle was grinding both sides down to nothing. And then the Dralith High Command, desperate and cornered, gave one final order. Every remaining Dralith ship, over 2,000 warships, was to break formation and charge directly at Earth at maximum speed. A suicide run. If they could not win, they would destroy the human homeworld and take the species with them. The Dralith fleet surged forward, engines burning at full power, aimed like a spear at the blue planet at the center of the system. Human ships tried to intercept, but the Dralith were not fighting anymore. They were not trying to survive. They were just trying to reach Earth. Admiral Vasquez watched the charge on her display and made a decision that would echo through galactic history. "Activate the rift compressor," she ordered. Deep in the asteroid belt, a machine the size of a small moon hummed to life. The rift compressor, built from Forbidden's knowledge, powered by energy that could crack a planet, fired a single pulse into the space between the charging Dralith fleet and Earth. Space folded. There was no other way to describe it. The fabric of reality bent inward, creating a tunnel of compressed space that caught the entire charging fleet in its grip. 2,000 warships, traveling at maximum speed, were pulled into the fold and redirected, not toward Earth, but toward the sun. The Dralith crews had approximately 4 seconds to understand what was happening before their ships were swallowed by the star. 2,000 warships, vaporized instantly in the heart of Sol. The remaining Vorthon and Maw of Silence ships, leaderless and terrified, dropped their weapons and surrendered within the hour. The Battle of Sol was over. The Sol system was a graveyard. Wreckage from thousands of ships drifted in every orbit. Earth was scarred but standing. Humanity had lost nearly half its fleet, millions of its people, and pieces of its home. But it had not lost itself. Admiral Vasquez sat on her bridge, exhausted, bleeding from a wound on her forehead that she had not noticed during the battle. Around her, the crew was quiet. Some were crying. Some were staring at nothing. The cost of survival was written on every face. She opened a communication channel. Not to her fleet, not to Earth. She opened a channel to every frequency used by every species in the galaxy. Military, civilian, diplomatic, commercial. Every channel, everywhere, all at once. The galaxy went silent, and they listened. Every species in the Milky Way heard the broadcast at the same time. On capital worlds and frontier colonies, in warships and trading vessels, in the grand chambers of the Galactic Concord, and in the smallest listening posts on the edge of known space, every receiver, every speaker, every screen carried the same signal. Admiral Kira Vasquez sat on the bridge of the UTS Iron Will. Her uniform was torn. There was dried blood on her face. Behind her, through the viewport, the wreckage of thousands of ships drifted past like ghosts. She looked directly into the camera, and when she spoke, her voice was steady and calm and carried the weight of everything humanity had just survived. This message is addressed to every species, every empire, every council, and every power in this galaxy. You know who we are. You watched what just happened. 3 of your most powerful empires came to our home with 12,000 warships and one goal: to wipe us from existence. Some of you helped them. Some of you sold them weapons and intelligence. Most of you simply watched and waited to see if we would die. She paused. The galaxy held its breath. We did not die. We survived, not because of your mercy, not because of your laws, not because of the Galactic Concord that was supposed to protect young species like us. We survived because we refused to be destroyed. Let this battle serve as our introduction to the galaxy. We are humanity. We are from Earth. We did not start this war, but we finished it. Her eyes hardened. And now, hear this. Our solar system, our colonies, and our people are sovereign and untouchable. Any act of aggression against humanity, by any species, for any reason, under any excuse, will be met not with a proportional response, but with total and complete destruction. We have the weapons. We have proven we have the will. And unlike the empires that came before us, we do not bluff. This is not a threat. It is a promise. A fact. A guarantee written in the ashes of 12,000 warships that tried to prove us wrong. She leaned forward slightly. Test it and be obliterated. The transmission ended. The galaxy was silent for a very long time. On the Concord homeworld, the reaction was immediate and chaotic. The Grand Assembly Hall, which had seen 200,000 years of calm deliberation, erupted into something close to panic. Delegates shouted at each other. Several species demanded that the Concord assemble its own fleet and destroy humanity before they grew any stronger. Others argued that this was exactly the kind of aggressive response that would get them all killed. The Kulari delegate, the same one who had called humanity an infant, sat in his elevated chair and said nothing. His hands were trembling. The debate lasted for 6 days. Military analysts presented their findings from the Battle of Seoul, and the numbers silenced even the loudest voices. Humanity had fought 3 empires simultaneously and won. They had weapons that bent space itself. They had soldiers who could not be broken by psychic attacks. And most importantly, they had shown a willingness to fight to the absolute last breath. The analysts concluded that a Concord military campaign against Earth would require the combined forces of at least 15 major species, and would result in casualties so catastrophic that the Concord itself might not survive the effort. And even then, victory was not guaranteed. On the 7th day, the Concord voted, by a narrow margin, far narrower than anyone was comfortable with. They officially recognized humanity as a Class 10 sovereign civilization. This was a classification that most species took thousands of years to achieve. Humanity had reached it in less than a century, leaping over 8 levels in a single bound. They were granted full membership in the Concord, a permanent seat in the Assembly, and all the territorial protections that came with it. Ambassador Idara Osei walked into the Concord chamber to take humanity's seat. She wore a simple black suit. No ceremonial robes, no medals, no symbols of conquest. Just a woman representing a species that had been told to accept its own death and had refused. She passed the Quillari delegate on her way to the human platform. He did not look at her. He could not. She sat down, placed her hands on the desk in front of her, and waited. She did not need to speak. Her presence said everything. In the months that followed, the galaxy reorganized itself around a new reality. The Dralith hegemony collapsed into civil war. Their own people, furious at the leadership that had provoked a war they could not win, tore the government apart. Warlord Seth Khan, captured during the battle, was handed over to the Dralith as a prisoner. His own people tried him for incompetence and sentenced him to exile on a barren moon. He spent the rest of his life staring at the stars he had once tried to conquer. The Vorthon Collective, always practical, quickly calculated that fighting humanity was economically wasteful. They sent a formal apology followed by a trade delegation. Within a year, Vorthon and human engineers were working together on joint projects. The Vorthon never admitted they were afraid, but they made very sure to never give humanity a reason to be angry. The Maw of Silence simply withdrew. Their entire fleet retreated to their home systems, and they stopped communicating with the rest of the galaxy. No one knew if they were afraid, ashamed, or simply recalculating. Whatever the reason, they never threatened another species again. But the most important change was smaller and quieter. Across the galaxy, dozens of species that had been oppressed, conquered, and forgotten began to reach out to Earth. They were the ones who had sent secret help during the war, the anonymous intelligence reports, the unmarked supply crates. Now they came forward openly and asked to stand with humanity. Earth welcomed them. The Soul Compact was formed, a new alliance built not on domination but on a simple principle. No species would ever be told to accept its own destruction again. Within 5 years, the Compact had 40 member species and was the fastest growing political force in the galaxy. Thalvern, the Quillari scientist who had brought humanity the plans for the rift compressor, was offered a permanent home on Earth. He chose a small house on the coast of Portugal, a country he had never heard of before arriving on this strange blue world. On his first evening there, he walked to the edge of the cliffs and watched the sun set over the Atlantic Ocean. The sky turned gold, then orange, then a deep and gentle red. The ocean stretched out forever, vast and calm. Wind moved through the grass at his feet. Somewhere behind him, in the small village, he could hear human children laughing. Thalvern had lived for over 400 years. He had seen wonders across the galaxy. Crystal cities that floated in gas-giant atmospheres, living ships that sang as they sailed between stars, nebulae that painted the sky in colors no eye could fully capture. But standing on that cliff, watching that simple sunset on a small planet at the edge of the galaxy, he wept. A human woman who lived nearby saw him and walked over. "Are you all right?" she asked. He wiped his eyes and tried to find the words. "In 400 years of life," he said, "I have never met a species that could be both this kind and this terrifying. I think the galaxy needed you. I think it has needed you for a very long time." She smiled, handed him a cup of tea, and sat with him until the stars came out. 5 years after the Battle of Sol, a young alien species on the far side of the galaxy made a terrible decision. They were called the Rethkari, and they were aggressive and ambitious. They conquered a neighboring species, took their worlds, and enslaved their population. The Galactic Concord sent a diplomatic warning. The Rethkari ignored it, just as so many empires before them had ignored it. Then a single ship appeared in their home system. It dropped out of faster-than-light travel without warning, alone, in the center of their most heavily defended space. It was a human warship, the UTS, remember Proxima, named for the colony that had started it all. The ship did not fire. It did not deploy weapons or launch fighters. It simply hung in space and broadcast a single message on every frequency. The message was Admiral Vasquez's warning. The same words she had spoken years ago from the bridge of the Iron Will. It played on loop, calm and clear and absolute. The Rethkari Military Council stared at the message. Then they pulled up the records from the Battle of Seoul. They watched the footage of Nova Lances cutting through dreadnoughts. They watched Marines boarding warships in zero gravity. They watched 2,000 Dralis ships folded into a star. They watched it all, and they understood. They released their captives within the hour. Every single one. The Remember Proxima turned and jumped back to human space without firing a shot. It did not need to. Centuries later, a galactic historian, a being from a species that measured time in millennia, sat down to write the definitive account of humanity's entrance onto the galactic stage. She had studied thousands of species, their rises and falls, their wars and their peace. But no species had ever fascinated her the way humans did. She spent decades on the work, interviewing survivors, reviewing records, and trying to understand how a species so young had changed the galaxy so completely. The final paragraph of her book was